What did you say your name was again?
He wrote in.
You know that feeling when a movie just crawls under your skin and stays there? When you can't shake off the images, the atmosphere, the strange pull of something that feels more like a fever dream than a Western. That's exactly what Clint Eastwood gave us in 1973 with High Plains Drifter. But here's the thing, this movie isn't just another cowboy flick. It's weird, it's dark, and the story behind making it is even stranger than what ended up on screen. So buckle up, because I'm about to take you through 20 bizarre facts about this cult classic that'll make you see it in a completely different light. Let's start with something that sounds almost too crazy to be true. This was only the second movie Clint Eastwood ever directed in his entire career. Can you imagine that? Here's a guy who would go on to become one of Hollywood's most legendary directors, and he was basically still learning the ropes. He'd only directed one film before this, a thriller called Play Misty for Me. So when Universal Studios handed him the keys to a Western, he was essentially a rookie behind the camera. But what did he do? He created one of the most unsettling and atmospheric Westerns ever made. That takes some serious guts and vision. Now here's where things get really interesting. The entire town you see in the movie, that creepy little place called Lago, didn't exist before they started filming. Universal Pictures built it from scratch on the shores of Mono Lake in California. They constructed every single building, every storefront, every dusty street corner specifically for this production. The production team worked for weeks creating this fake town in the middle of nowhere. And you know what's kind of haunting? After filming wrapped, they just left most of it standing there. For years, people could visit the remains of Lago, walking through the same streets where Eastwood's mysterious stranger delivered his cold-blooded justice. Mother Nature eventually reclaimed most of it, but for a while, it was like stumbling onto a ghost town that was born as a ghost town. Let me tell you about the character Eastwood plays, because this is where the movie gets really deep and mysterious. His character doesn't have a name. Not once in the entire film does anyone call him by a proper name. He's just a stranger. And if you've seen the movie, you know there's this wild theory that is not even a living person. A lot of fans and critics believe is actually a ghost, the spirit of the town marshal who was brutally whipped to death in the streets while the townspeople just watched and did nothing. Think about that. The whole movie might be about a ghost coming back to make the guilty pay for their sins. Eastwood never confirmed or denied this interpretation, but he definitely left enough clues to make it believable. Speaking of mysteries, Eastwood himself wrote some of the script. The original screenplay was penned by Ernest Tideman, who was a pretty big deal at the time because he'd written The French Connection and created the character Shaft. But Eastwood wasn't satisfied with everything in the original version. He sat down and rewrote portions of it, adding his own ideas and changing the tone in places. This wasn't just an actor reading lines someone else wrote. This was Eastwood putting his own stamp on the story, crafting the nightmarish vision he had in his head. That's the kind of creative control that most actors only dream about. Here's a fact that'll blow your mind about the look of the film. Eastwood chose to shoot the movie in this really unusual washed-out style that made everything look pale and dreamlike, almost faded. The cinematographer Bruce Surtees used special filters and techniques to drain some of the color from the scenes. Why would they do that? Because Eastwood wanted the whole movie to feel like a memory or a nightmare, something that wasn't quite real. When you watch it, everything has this eerie, desaturated quality that makes you feel uncomfortable in a way you can't quite explain. It was a bold artistic choice that some studios would have fought against, but Eastwood fought for his vision and won. Now let's talk about one of the most controversial scenes in cinema history. There's a scene in this movie where Eastwood's character forces himself on a woman who had been hostile to him, and afterward, she seems to become attracted to him. By today's standards, and honestly by any decent standards, this scene is really problematic and disturbing. It sparked debates even back in 1973. Some critics called it out immediately, while others tried to justify it as part of the dark, morally ambiguous world Eastwood was creating. Looking back now, it's one of those elements that makes a movie hard to watch and definitely wouldn't be made the same way today. It's important to acknowledge this because we can appreciate aspects of old films while still recognizing what aged poorly. Here's something lighter. The budget for this entire film was incredibly small by Hollywood standards, around $3 million. That might sound like a lot, but for a major studio western, it was pretty tight. Eastwood had to be smart about every dollar. Building that town, paying the cast and crew, all the filming equipment, Everything had to come from that budget. And you know what? The movie made over $15 million at the box office. It was a massive success, proving that you don't need a bloated budget to create something powerful and memorable. Eastwood delivered a profitable hit while maintaining complete creative control. Let me tell you about the twisted plot that still confuses people today. The townspeople of Lago hired this stranger to protect them from 3 criminals who are coming back for revenge. These criminals used to work for the town, but the townspeople had them sent to prison. Now they are coming back, and everyone's terrified. So they hire Eastwood's character to save them. But here's the twisted part. Instead of just protecting them like a normal hero would, the stranger turns their lives into a living hell. He demands anything he wants, humiliates them, and eventually makes them paint the entire town red and rename it hell. Then when the criminals arrive, he basically lets chaos unfold. It's like he's punishing the townspeople for something, and if you believe the ghost theory, he's punishing them for letting the marshal die. The town gets painted red in one of the most visually striking sequences in any Western. Eastwood's character literally makes the townspeople paint every single building bright red. Houses, the hotel, the saloon, the church, everything. The symbolism is pretty heavy-handed but incredibly effective. Red for blood, red for guilt, red for hell itself. Watching these cowardly townspeople climb ladders and slap red paint on their buildings while the stranger watches is both darkly comic and deeply unsettling. It's Eastwood turning their whole world into a representation of their sins. No other Western had ever done anything quite like this before. Here's a behind-the-scenes detail that shows how hands-on Eastwood was as a director. He was famous for working fast and efficiently. While other directors would do 10 or 15 takes of every scene, Eastwood would often nail it in 1 or 2. He believed that actors gave their best performances early, and if you kept making them repeat scenes over and over, it would lose a natural feeling. His crew loved this approach because it meant they finished days or even weeks ahead of schedule. For the actors, it meant you had to show up prepared because you might only get one chance to get it right. This style became Eastwood's trademark throughout his entire directing career. The music in this film is absolutely haunting, and there's an interesting story there too. The score was composed by D. Barton, who wasn't a big Hollywood name. He'd worked as a jazz musician and had done some television work, but this was his first major feature film. Eastwood took a chance on him, and Barton delivered this eerie, unsettling soundtrack that's full of strange sounds and uncomfortable melodies. It's not the kind of rousing Western music you'd expect. Instead, it crawls under your skin and makes you feel like something terrible is always about to happen. That score is a huge part of why the movie feels so nightmarish. Let's talk about the ending, which leaves most people with their jaws on the floor. After all the violence and chaos, the stranger just rides away. But before he goes, a dwarf character named Mordecai is carving a new tombstone for the murdered marshal. He's about to carve the marshal's name on it when he sees the stranger riding off. Mordecai stares at him and then looks back at the tombstone, and you can see the realization hitting him. The movie ends without spelling it out, but the implication is crystal clear. The stranger and the dead marshal are the same person. Or the stranger is the marshal's ghost. Or his spirit of vengeance. However you interpret it, it's chilling. Eastwood refused to make it explicit because he wanted audiences to wrestle with the question themselves. Here's something about the violence in the film that shocked audiences back then. This movie is brutal, especially for 1973. There's whipping, shooting, burning, all depicted in a very raw way. Eastwood didn't glamorize the violence or make it look heroic. People die ugly deaths, and it feels mean and nasty. Some critics praise his realistic approach, saying it showed the true cost of violence instead of making it look cool. Others thought it was too harsh and sadistic. Either way, it pushed boundaries for what you could show in a Western. It definitely wasn't your grandfather's cowboy movie. The 3 villains in the story have this weird backstory that makes the whole plot even more twisted. These guys, Stacey Bridges and his partners, were hired by the town to kill the marshal because he discovered that the mining company was illegally operating on government land. So the town's leaders, who were making money from the mine, wanted him dead. They got these thugs to whip him to death in the street while everyone watched. Then, to cover their tracks, they framed these same 3 men for another crime and sent them to prison. So when the villains come back for revenge, they actually have a legitimate grievance. The townspeople are cowards and murderers themselves. Nobody in the story is truly good, which is what makes it so morally complex and disturbing. Eastwood's character does some really bizarre things throughout the movie that add to his mystique. He takes free reign of the town, sleeping in any bed he wants, eating any food he wants, taking whatever he needs from the stores. The townspeople are so desperate for protection that they let him do whatever he wants, even when he humiliates them. There's this incredible power dynamic where he's exposing their weakness and cowardice with every action. He's like a dark mirror showing them what they really are, and they have to swallow their pride and take it because they are too scared to face the consequences of their past actions alone. Let me tell you about a visual choice that seems small but is actually really important. Throughout the film, Eastwood's character is often shot with the sun directly behind him, putting his face in shadow. This makes him look like a dark silhouette, mysterious and threatening. You often can't see his eyes clearly, which makes him seem less human and more like a force of nature or supernatural entity. This lighting choice was deliberate and used repeatedly. It keeps the stranger unknowable and frightening. We never fully see who he is because maybe there's nothing there to see, just vengeance wearing human shape. The movie tanked with some critics when it first came out, but audiences loved it. A lot of professional reviews didn't know what to make of this weird, dark, surreal Western. Some called it pretentious. Others said it was too bleak and nihilistic. Roger Ebert gave it a negative review, saying it was just a reworking of old Western tropes without adding anything meaningful. But regular moviegoers lined up to see it. They responded to its raw power and its willingness to break the rules. Over time, critics came around, and now it's considered one of the best revisionist Westerns ever made. It just goes to show that sometimes the audience knows better than the experts. There's this fascinating religious symbolism woven throughout the entire film. The stranger is like an avenging angel or demon, depending on how you look at it. He literally renames the town hell, and paints it red like fire and brimstone. The townspeople are forced to confront their sins. There's judgment and punishment. Even the fact that they all stood by while an innocent man was murdered echoes the story of Pontius Pilate and the crowd watching Jesus die. Eastwood was raised Catholic, and whether he intended all these parallels or not, they're definitely there. The whole movie plays like a fire and brimstone sermon about guilt, cowardice, and divine retribution. Here's something about Eastwood's directing style that the cast remembered. He barely talked to his actors about motivation or backstory. He'd set up the shot, explain what needed to happen physically, and then let them act. If they asked him about their character's feelings or internal state, he'd just shrug and say something like, "You're a person, you know how people act." This minimalist approach freaked out some actors who were used to directors who wanted to discuss every emotional beat. But others found it liberating. It forced them to trust their instincts and make bold choices. It's such a different approach from method directors who want to psychoanalyze every moment. The location where they filmed, around Mono Lake, added so much to the atmosphere. This is a strange, ancient lake in California with bizarre rock formations called tufa towers rising out of the alkaline water. The landscape looks alien and harsh, like something from another planet. The production uses otherworldly environment to make everything feel off-kilter and wrong. When you see the town of Lago sitting in this barren, hostile landscape, it reinforces the idea that these people are isolated and damned. Location can make or break a film, and Eastwood chose a perfect spot to tell this particular story. Finally, let's talk about how this movie influenced everything that came after it. High Plains Drifter opened the door for darker, weirder westerns that weren't afraid to mess with the genre's conventions. You can see its influence in films like Unforgiven, which Eastwood directed years later, and in modern westerns that play with supernatural elements. It proved that audiences were ready for westerns that questioned the mythology of the Old West and showed the ugly side of frontier justice. Without High Plains Drifter, we might never have gotten some of the complex, morally ambiguous westerns that followed. It changed what was possible in the genre. So there you have it, 20 weird and fascinating facts about a movie that still haunts people more than 50 years after it was made. High Plains Drifter isn't just a western. It's a ghost story, a morality play, a revenge fantasy, and a nightmare all rolled into one. It's the work of a director who was just finding his voice but already willing to take huge creative risks. Whether you think the stranger is a ghost or just a man, whether you see it as profound or pretentious, you can't deny that it's unlike anything else out there. If you enjoyed diving deep into this classic film with me, do me a huge favor and smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content like this. Share this video with your movie-loving friends who appreciate the weird and wonderful world of cinema. And please, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another video. I've got so many more strange stories and hidden facts about classic films coming your way. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.